My parents didn't call, text, or knock. They left a note on the kitchen island in perfect handwriting, like it was part of a business memo. The wedding's canceled. You'll hear from our attorney, Mom and Dad. That was it. No, we're sorry. No, let's talk. Just a straight-up kill shot wrapped in Times New Roman. I stood there holding the note barefoot, still in gym clothes. My phone was in my hand. I could have called them. I could have sent a long dramatic text, but I didn't. I just stared at that stupid piece of paper and thought, so this is how it ends. Not with a fight, but with stationery. Instead of reacting like the daughter they expected, the one who cries, begs, and gives up, I opened my laptop and logged into the real estate portal. I checked the status of the house they bought me in Colorado. The one they gave me as a gift after I left the military, still technically tied to a family trust. 10 minutes later, I emailed our family's estate attorney. Subject line: transfer title to sole ownership Sarah Bennett. It wasn't about the house. It was about leverage. If they wanted to weaponize my wedding, I was going to freeze the damn battlefield. Let's set the record straight before you think I'm some rich kid going rogue. Yes, my parents are well connected. My dad's dad, a retired Air Force colonel, is running for state senate. My mom's a former Pentagon advisor who can quote defense budgets better than her anniversary. Growing up was structured. Imagine being told to eat breakfast like it's a classified mission. But I didn't grow up spoiled. I grew up handled. Every decision: college, career, dates, shoes, went through a silent approval process. Their silence was louder than most people shouting. So when I got engaged to James, a military man they considered damaged goods, they smiled in public and plotted in private. It was only a matter of time before they pulled something like this. I just didn't think they'd be this lazy about it. I texted James, change of plans. I'll explain soon. He replied with just, your call. I'm with you. That was it. That's who he is. No panic, no pressure, just there. Always. I made one more call, this time to the bank that managed the family trust. I gave them one instruction. Freeze all linked distributions. The asset is in dispute. No yelling, no drama, just paperwork. You know their language. Oh, and by the way, if this sounds like your kind of story, drop a comment below and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, it gets even messier. Now, 48 hours after that little letter bomb, I'm in Colorado sitting on the couch watching reruns, hair in a towel, and someone starts banging on my front door like it's a hostage situation. I check the camera. It's my parents. My father's in a suit tie, slightly crooked. My mother's wearing sunglasses indoors, which I know means she's either crying or planning a lawsuit. They didn't call ahead, didn't text, just showed up. I don't open the door right away. I just stand there for a second, arms crossed, watching them through the camera feed like it's a wildlife documentary. Observe the North American parent forced to hunt for resources they once freely controlled. I finally open the door. My dad starts talking before I can even breathe. Sarah, we need to talk. I hold up the note. Oh, you mean, like this kind of talk? My mom tries to push past me. I block the door with one hand. We're not doing this here, I say. Or like this. They stand there confused, like they don't understand how I got this calm, this firm. I've never yelled at my parents. Not once. That was never my style. But I was trained to make decisions fast. And the first thing you learn in combat: don't wait to be attacked. Act when they least expect it. My mom drops the lawyer card again. You'll hear from our attorney. I smile. Already did. He's slower than your florist. That one lands. She winces. My dad shifts his weight, looking like he suddenly regrets the entire note. They leave 5 minutes later. No yelling, just more silence. I don't slam the door. I don't cry. I just walk back to the kitchen, pour myself a glass of water, and recheck the security camera. Their car sits in the driveway for another 10 minutes before backing out. That was the first time in my life I watched them retreat. No fight, no apology, just reverse gear and distance. And I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel broken either. I just felt ready, like something old had finally snapped, not in me, but in them. Like they realized I wasn't theirs to manage anymore. And maybe that scared them more than losing money ever could. I set the glass down, sat on the couch, picked up my phone, and texted James one word: start packing. I packed nothing fancy, just the duffel I used in Afghanistan. Same one that survived sandstorms and 12 months of canned chili. Felt more fitting than a suitcase. Anyway, James picked me up outside my place in Denver. He didn't say a word, just reached over and turned the music up, some 90s rock playlist we always joked was his emotional support system. I leaned back in the seat and looked out the window. The highway didn't care that a wedding just exploded. 3 months earlier, we weren't even thinking about tuxes or catering. We were just trying to get through a barbecue at my parents' house without them interrogating James like he was applying for top-secret clearance. It was supposed to be casual burgers, lawn chairs. Those fake smiles my mom wears when there's wine in her hand and judgment in her eyes. My dad hovered by the grill like he was running a covert op. James tried to help flip burgers and was promptly told, "It's under control." Translation: don't touch anything. You're still being evaluated. Later, while I was inside, helping set the table, I overheard them. "He's not stable, Elizabeth," my father said. "You know what happened after Fallujah? He looks fine now, but we can't risk another headline." My mother answered, "Not with the campaign right. God forbid anything interfere with Charles Bennett's Senate run. Priorities." They weren't whispering. They wanted me to hear. It was their version of, "We're just concerned." And I was supposed to thank them for it. I didn't say anything that night. I just drove James home and didn't mention the conversation. But I knew then that the wedding wouldn't be about me or us. It would be about optics damage control and controlling the narrative, just like everything else in my life. When we finally got engaged, my mother's first question wasn't, "Are you happy?" It was, "Do we know his background's clean?" I told her if they wanted a criminal check, they could run it themselves since they probably already had. Instead of flowers and congratulations, I got a PDF labeled Event Guidelines Venue, Recommendations, Guest List Quotas, and a 2-page section on dress code for public perception. James didn't care about the politics. He cared about me, and that meant agreeing to a wedding funded by 2 people who thought compromise meant letting me pick the napkin color. But we played along at least for a while. My father insisted on hosting the rehearsal dinner at his golf club. Full tuxes champagne that tasted like it came with its own mortgage. I remember watching him shake hands with a defense contractor he once called a bloated idiot, smiling like it was just another campaign event, because that's what this had become, a PR stunt wrapped in wedding bells. One night, James pulled me aside after another meeting about floral centerpieces. "Tell me the truth," he said. "Is this our wedding, or are we guests at theirs?" I didn't answer right away because deep down I knew the answer, and it was making my skin crawl. My mom had even brought in a wedding strategist, not a planner, a strategist. She wore power blazers and said things like media-safe aesthetics. She asked James to shave his beard. He didn't even flinch. He just looked her dead in the eyes and said, "You can Photoshop me." That was James in a nutshell: calm, funny, lethal when necessary, which made him dangerous in my parents' eyes. We sat in bed one night, staring at the ceiling, not speaking. The silence was louder than anything. Finally, he said, "I can call it off if it means you don't have to choose." I turned to him and said the only thing I could think of I already chose. The next day, I started looking at alternate venues far from DC, far from my parents, far from their damn campaign signs. I found a place in Colorado. Quiet, private, nothing polished or political. James loved it. We didn't tell anyone, but somehow my parents found out. My guess? Someone from their security detail was still tracking my accounts. Or maybe my email wasn't as private as I thought. Either way, the disapproval didn't take long to roll in. "Colorado's unmanageable," my mom said. "Your grandfather's friends won't travel." My dad added, "Who exactly is going to attend this translation?" This doesn't benefit us. I told them the location was final, that we'd cover it ourselves if we had to, that we didn't need a single cent from them. My mother didn't scream. She didn't argue. She just looked at me like I'd joined a cult. "We've worked hard to build this family's name," she said. "Don't throw it away on a phase." A phase. That's what she called love. Loyalty. A man who stood by me when the army didn't. A man who took a fall for a chain of command screw-up he didn't even cause. So I stopped responding to emails. I didn't show up to the next wedding planning meeting. I blocked my mom's strategist. I changed my passwords. Quietly, James and I started planning our wedding. But you can't quietly leave a family that built itself on power. You can't just walk away without triggering alarms, because people like my parents don't fight fair. They fight like losing control is worse than losing a daughter. And the second they realized I meant it, that I was serious, they did what they always do when they feel threatened: they pulled the trigger. I didn't flinch when I opened the group chat and saw my mom had renamed it Bennett Wedding Coordination. Not Sarah's wedding, not Sarah and James. Just the family name and the word coordination, like we were launching a product, not a marriage. The first thing she posted was a 5-page agenda for the week of the wedding, color-coded. It included suggested guest talking points, a morning press walkthrough, and a paragraph about approved photographers. There was also a clause about exempting non-aligned parties from the invitation list. That's politician speak, for we don't want his people there. James skimmed it and laughed. "So I need clearance to bring my own best man." I said nothing. I just closed the tab and went back to my coffee. It wasn't the first time my mom had treated personal milestones like press ops. She once made me send thank you cards to classmates for attending my Sweet 16 pre-written cards, with fonts picked to match the family brand kit. This wasn't about the wedding. It was about containment control framing the narrative. That week, they booked a ballroom at the Jefferson Hotel in D.C., the kind with chandeliers so heavy they need steel reinforcement. My mom arranged a VIP seating chart which featured James's name scratched out in pencil under the heading Pending Security Approval. He looked at it, then looked at me. "Tell me again why we're letting them do any of this." I didn't have a good answer. All I knew was that pushing back too hard too soon would just make them dig in deeper. I figured if we played along just enough, we could slide through unnoticed and do things our way on the side. But that was naive. My parents don't do halfway. At the next planning meeting, my father brought a manila folder. He slid it across the table to James and said, "This is the NDA media screening. Standard vetting. Don't take it personally." It was 22 pages long. It included a summary of James's discharged public comments about military corruption and a blurry photo of him from a protest in 2016, one he didn't even remember attending. "Where did you even get this?" James asked, flipping through it. "You're marrying into a legacy," my dad said. "We do our due diligence." That was the first time I saw James's jaw lock. He didn't say anything else. He just stood up, folded the file, and left. I followed him outside. He was pacing on the sidewalk, cracking his knuckles. "They're not planning a wedding," he said. "They're running a background check." I reached for his hand and he pulled away, not angry, just tired. "I can take a lot," he said. "But if I let this happen, I'm not just letting them win. I'm helping them erase me." That was when I realized we were approaching a line, one of those invisible ones people don't discuss until it's too late, the kind that changes everything once you step over it. We got in his truck and drove silently for almost half an hour. Then he pulled off at a gas station and looked at me. "I'll marry you anywhere," he said. "But I won't stand up there as a prop in your parents' political theater. If that's what this is turning into, I need to know now." I didn't cry. I didn't apologize. I just told him the truth. "You're not the problem. They are." The next day, I told my mom we were moving the wedding out of D.C. She acted like I'd declared war on the State Department. "Do you know how hard it is to rebook a venue this close to the date?" "We haven't signed a final contract," I said. "So yeah, I know." She called it impulsive, said, I was being influenced, that I was letting emotions override strategy. That was the word she always used when emotions got in the way of control strategy. I told her we'd be holding the wedding in Colorado, somewhere simple outside. Not because we couldn't afford DC, but because we didn't want DC. Her reply, one line. Good luck explaining this to your grandfather. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Later that week, James and I visited the small private venue we'd picked outside Boulder. It was rustic, a little messy, surrounded by trees. The owner was a retired Marine with a limp and a smoker's voice, who gave us a discount because we showed up on time and didn't talk like politicians. As we walked the grounds, James looked around and said, "Feels like neutral ground." I smiled because it was. For once, we weren't being staged. We were just standing on dirt, breathing air, making plans that belonged to us. We signed the contract that day, paid half in cash. I told no one except 2 close friends and my cousin Claire, who swore secrecy like a blood oath. I figured my parents wouldn't find out, not yet. But I underestimated how much surveillance was baked into the Bennett family machine. A week later, my mother casually mentioned Colorado over dinner. I heard the altitude's rough this time of year, she said, sipping wine. Depends on what you're trying to breathe through, I replied. She raised an eyebrow, didn't respond. James squeezed my hand under the table. I could feel the pulse in his thumb, steady, focused. My father changed the subject, but he didn't change the tone. Because once they know they're losing you, they don't let go quietly. They just change tactics. I didn't answer the call when I saw Mom's cell lighting up my phone at 6:42 a.m. It was a Saturday. Normal people sleep in. My mom schedules psychological warfare before sunrise. She left a voicemail. No hello, no hope you're well. Just, there will be press at the engagement brunch. Dress accordingly. I stared at the screen, then put the phone face down. Brunch. I hadn't agreed to brunch. I hadn't agreed to press. I hadn't even agreed to speak to her. But the part that pissed me off wasn't the brunch itself. It was the tone. She still believed I was in the program following the itinerary. Spoiler, I wasn't. Still, James and I went not because we wanted to, but because disappearing would have been worse, more dramatic, more spin-worthy. And if there's one thing I learned growing up with my parents, it's that sometimes the best move is to show up, smile, and be disruptive enough to make your point. The brunch was held at a country club outside Alexandria, the kind of place where the servers wear white gloves and the walls smell like generational wealth. Everyone there looked like they were either running for office or funding someone who was. We walked in and I could already feel it, the tension, the fake laughter, the subtle glances from people trying to figure out whether James was the groom or the bodyguard. My mom greeted us at the door. Her smile was surgical. No warmth, just practiced civility. You made it, she said. Like we were late. We weren't invited, I said, and walked past her. Inside the room was arranged like a campaign dinner, step and repeat banners with our last name, framed photos of me in uniform, even a printed quote on the centerpieces that said, "Legacy is built by generations." I looked at James. He mouthed, "What the hell is this?" I whispered back. "Our wedding. Or at least, their version." He squeezed my hand. Not the romantic kind of squeeze, the stay calm or I'm walking out kind. A few minutes later, my father took the mic. He gave a 5-minute speech about leadership tradition and how our daughter found someone who embodies American values. I almost choked on my mimosa. This man called James a walking liability behind closed doors 2 months earlier. Then came the photos, organized, posed, rigid. I was told where to stand, how to smile, when to laugh. When one photographer tried to include James's brother, who'd driven 6 hours to be there, he was told, "We're keeping it tight on family. He's family. But sure, keep it tight." On the way out, James pulled me aside and said, "This isn't a wedding. It's a hostage negotiation with catering." I didn't argue because he was right. Back at our hotel, I finally opened the file my dad had left on the kitchen counter earlier that week. I hadn't touched it before. I just kept pushing it to the side as if it would stop existing if I ignored it hard enough. Inside contracts, legal documents, trust arrangements tied to the marriage, clauses about asset management, inheritance, contingencies, and marital conduct expectations. It was a damn prenup package dressed up as a family gift. Buried in the fine print. If the wedding does not occur in Washington, D.C., or if the marriage is conducted without formal family involvement, financial transfers may be subject to reevaluation. Translation: you don't get the money if you don't play by our rules. And more importantly, you don't get the name. I showed James the papers. He didn't even blink. "Burn it," he said. I laughed. He wasn't kidding. "No, really? They're going to test you over and over. You sure they don't know who I am?" I said. "But they're about to." We didn't burn the papers. We scanned them. Then we sent them to a lawyer I'd met during a military contracting case 3 years earlier, a woman named Rachel, who didn't flinch at powerful names. She looked at the documents and said, "This isn't a prenup. It's a leash." I told her I wanted options, not just legal, strategic, financial. She asked one question: "Are you ready to go nuclear?" I said I'm ready to go quiet. Same result, less noise. Over the next few days, we transferred what we could, moved funds, shut down shared access accounts, shifted anything linked to my parents' financial shadow into locked personal structures. Quiet, clean, no trace. Meanwhile, the wedding machine kept rolling without us. My mom sent new itineraries. My dad made calls to vendors. A cousin posted a story tagging the wedding venue in D.C., and people started asking why we hadn't shared anything. So we dropped the news casually. One post, no caption, just a picture of a mountain view and 2 wedding bands on a wooden table. Location tag, Colorado. That's when the phone calls started. I didn't answer. Then came the texts. I didn't respond. Then came the warning, not from them, but from someone else. My cousin Claire called me at midnight, whispering like she was afraid her phone was bugged. "Your mom's pulling strings, like real strings. Something about James's past. Some file. I don't know what, but it's not good." I didn't panic. I just asked one question. "Where's the file?" I didn't sleep after that call with Claire. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, mentally tracing every step my parents might have taken. The worst part wasn't the threat itself, it was the fact that it felt entirely plausible. Growing up in a family where power is currency, you learn early, nothing is off limits if it protects the brand. At 6 a.m., I texted Claire again. "Where did you hear about the file?" She replied almost instantly. "Heard your dad on the phone. Said something about Fallujah. Said they can't let that version get out. Then he told your mom to contact someone named Thompson." I froze. That name wasn't random. Major Thompson served under my dad overseas logistics officer clean record, but I remembered hearing his name whispered during an investigation my last year in uniform, something about manipulated reports, suppressed witness statements, the kind of military paperwork that gets lost when careers are on the line. I got out of bed, made coffee, and pulled out the old metal lockbox I'd kept since deployment. Inside were files, contacts, and digital backups I never thought I'd need again until now. There was one USB drive labeled Q4 Debriefs RE. It had a password I hadn't used since 2017. I found the transcript from a briefing my father once led. It wasn't classified, just restricted access, but tucked in the transcript's margin was a notation next to James's name: "Command deviation subject accepted reprimand voluntarily." That line stuck with me. Voluntarily. It meant James took the fall not because he was guilty, but because someone needed to. And that someone, based on the command logs, was probably my father. I sent the file to Rachel, told her to verify everything off the record. 2 hours later, she called. "This is dirty," she said. "It's not just about James, it's about a cover-up." "How bad?" I asked. Bad enough that if it gets out, your dad won't just lose the campaign. He might get dragged into a congressional inquiry. That wasn't my plan. I didn't want to burn him down. I just wanted to get married without being blackmailed by my bloodline. Rachel wasn't done. There's more. Elizabeth contacted a firm in D.C. They're prepping a cease and desist in case you use the Bennett name in any public-facing event. That includes the wedding invitation. I laughed out loud. That was the most on-brand move my mother could make, trying to trademark my last name against me. Send me the draft, I told her. A few hours later, a formal PDF landed in my inbox with a letterhead that screamed expensive. 3 pages of legalese said, if you proceed with the Colorado wedding using the family name public references or imply association with political assets, we reserve the right to pursue legal remedy. The phrase pursue legal remedy is rich, from a woman who once asked me to fake a smile through a panic attack for a holiday card. That night, James came home and saw the papers on the counter. They really did it. Yep. They threatened legal action over a wedding. Correction, my wedding. He shook his head. That's not normal. Welcome to my childhood. I poured him a drink, then wine. We sat in silence for a minute before I said, if they want war, I'm done using polite weapons. He didn't ask what I meant. He just nodded. The next morning, I booked a ticket to Charleston, South Carolina, not for a vacation for someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. Aunt Margaret, my mother's estranged sister, the black sheep of the Bennett family, the one who vanished after a scandal that was never explained and never spoken of again. I knew she'd served in the same region as my father, same theater, different sides of command. And if anyone had a reason to talk, it was someone who'd been erased by the same machine now aimed at me. I didn't tell my parents I was going, didn't tell anyone but James and Rachel. I landed in Charleston just before sunset. The air was thick, humid, like secrets clinging to your skin. Her house was small, overgrown, half-painted, proof she didn't care who drove by. I knocked once. She opened the door like she'd been expecting me. You're late, she said. I didn't say I was coming. Didn't have to. We sat in her kitchen. No pleasantries, just 2 women with shared DNA and a long history of being talked over. I pulled out the file, showed her the note with James's name, the command deviation. She didn't even blink. That's not the worst of it, she said. So you knew I lived it. Then she stood up, walked to the back of the room, and returned with a battered envelope, thick sealed and covered in handwriting I recognized immediately. It was my father's pristine penmanship. He never thought anyone would keep a copy, Margaret said. But I did. She pushed it across the table. You want to know the truth? Start there. I didn't open the envelope right away. I just sat there, holding it fingertips against the brittle corners, watching the condensation slide down a glass of sweet tea I wasn't drinking. Margaret didn't rush me. She just lit a cigarette, opened a window that barely opened, and waited like this was some kind of quiet ceremony. I finally broke the seal. Inside were 3 documents. One was a personal memo from my father, one was a redacted field incident report, and the third was a copy of a disciplinary agreement signed by James. It was real, not a rumor, not office politics. My father had orchestrated the entire thing. The memo was addressed to Central Command and dated 2 weeks after a failed convoy recovery op in Fallujah. The language was slick, polished, too calm for what had happened. But the tone was unmistakable. My dad had convinced his superiors that James's decisions were erratic, not in alignment with command priorities. And he didn't just recommend disciplinary action, he offered to help execute it. That's not how it works in theory, but if you know how to shape a story, the military listens. Margaret didn't flinch as I read it. They needed a scapegoat, she said. And James wasn't from a legacy family. No one would question it. And your father just handed him over. He handed over a dozen, Sarah. James was just the one who mattered to you. The report described the op like a logistical hiccup. It left out the part where 2 soldiers were injured during the retreat because intel was pulled too late. It also left out that my father was the one who delayed the intel approval. I knew how these reports were written. I used to help draft them. The art was in omission. Why keep this? I asked. Because I thought one day someone would actually ask. Why didn't you go public? She smirked. You don't burn down a house while your sister's still living in it. But you already moved out. I slipped the documents into a manila folder and set them beside my bag. Can I take them? They're yours now. The ride back to the airport was quiet. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even shocked. I was calibrated like my brain had adjusted to a new setting where betrayal was a fact, not a feeling. On the plane, I scanned the memo again. The language was so familiar I could hear my father's voice in every line, measured, objective, almost elegant in its lack of remorse. The kind of writing that turns real people into footnotes. Back in Colorado, I met with Rachel. She read the documents like a prosecutor preparing for trial. We can bury him with this, she said. That's not the goal, I replied. I just want them out of the way. She raised an eyebrow. Then we hold it like a pin in a grenade. I sat with James on the porch that night and told him everything, every word, every file, every line of bureaucratic betrayal. He didn't speak for a full minute, just stared out at the mountain line, chewing his thumbnail like he was holding something down. I knew it wasn't clean, he said, but I never thought he'd put it in writing. He didn't think anyone would ever see it. You sure you want to get married with all this hanging overhead? Especially with this, I said, because now it's on our terms. I handed him the folder. Want to read it? He shook his head. I don't need to. You just did. That was when I knew he wasn't just in this for me. He was in it with me. The next morning, I mailed scanned copies of the documents to 2 people, one a private investigator who'd previously worked with Margaret. The other a veteran liaison at a nonprofit for wrongfully discharged soldiers. I wasn't making it public, but I was making it known. Then I called the caterer in D.C., the one my mom booked without asking. I told them the Bennett wedding was canceled and they could keep the deposit. The guy didn't argue, he just said figured as much. I changed the wedding invitations, removed the family crest, changed the RSVP address. I even deleted my father's middle name from the official registry entry. 2 days later, I got an email from my mom. No greeting, no signature, just a PDF attachment titled Mediation Proposal. It was 10 pages long. In short, if we agreed to delay the wedding and resume coordination, all legal action would be paused. James's background would not be disclosed to press or parties of influence, and we'd be reinstated into the family estate plan. My reply was one sentence. We're not interested in coordination. I copied in Rachel CC'd James and sent. Later that afternoon, my father texted me. Just 3 words. Is this final? I stared at it for a while, then replied. Was it ever real? No answer. I put my phone down, walked out into the backyard. James was chopping wood. I told him. They blinked. He smiled without stopping. Good. Let's make them regret it. I wasn't expecting the envelope waiting on our porch the next morning. No delivery slip, no courier van, just a matte black folder with a red seal and my full name in serif font, like it was addressed by someone who still believed titles could command fear. Inside, a formal letter from Bennett and Associates, my father's campaign legal team. It wasn't about the wedding, it was about defamation. They claimed we had intentionally disseminated false, misleading, or reputationally damaging materials regarding Colonel Charles Bennett. The materials in question, the truth. I walked inside, dropped the envelope on the counter, and laughed. James looked up from his laptop. What now? They're threatening to sue us for knowing what actually happened. He stood up, stretched like he was shaking off years of tight protocol, and said, Good. That means it's working. Rachel reviewed the letter within the hour. Her response was even colder than mine. They're bluffing. They're not scared of a lawsuit. They're scared of exposure. She advised no response, No escalation, just silence. Because when someone like my father doesn't get a reaction, they start unraveling on their own. But I couldn't sit still. I called Margaret. They moved. Full legal threat this time. Then stop defending, she said. Start countering. I knew what that meant. It meant dropping the one move I'd been saving, not to destroy them, but to draw a line. I printed the internal memo that showed my father's role in James's disciplinary transfer and attached a one-page summary with dates, locations, and source confirmation. Then I hand-delivered it to two people, one a veteran-led media blog called Moral Ground, known for exposing internal abuse of the military chain of command, two Senator William Holt's chief of staff, who happened to be running against my father in the upcoming state race, and who'd once publicly criticized misuse of military records for political advancement. Neither outlet ran the story right away. They didn't need to. All I needed was for both sides to know the other had it. That's how you play cold chess, give everyone a reason to hesitate. That night, James and I went to dinner in town like nothing had happened. We sat at a bar with mismatched stools, ordered ribs, and listened to a guy in his 50s yell at football highlights like he owned the team. Halfway through the meal, my phone buzzed. It was Claire. "They know what you did." "What?" "Breathing," I said. "Know the file. They're furious. Let them be." "Sarah, they're not just angry. They're panicking." I hung up and looked at James. "They're spooked." He grinned. "Then we're finally speaking their language." The next day, we received another proposal dressed as a peace offering, a final attempt to settle amicably. It offered to reinstate financial gifts, family appearances, even a future trust fund clause for our hypothetical kids, as long as we signed a joint NDA and dropped the wedding. I didn't even open it. I forwarded the email to Rachel with the subject line, "Try harder." But it wasn't just emails. That same afternoon, my father showed up alone. No legal team, no handlers, just him in a Navy sport coat, like he'd just come from a fundraiser where the shrimp was overpriced and the donors were clueless. He asked to come in. I said no. He asked to speak off the record. I said, "I'm not a journalist." Then he said the line I hadn't heard since I was 16, "You're not acting like a Bennett." "Exactly," I said. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. But I could see his jaw tightening, fingers flexing slightly. For a man who built his life around image-losing grip meant something worse than rage. It meant exposure. "You still have time to fix this," he said. "Fix what? That you got caught? That you think you can win without us?" I stepped closer and met his eyes. "Watch me." He turned without another word and walked back to the car. No goodbye, not even a glance. But I didn't feel like I'd won. It didn't feel clean or triumphant. It felt necessary. Later that evening, I found a folder on our porch again. Just a loose pile of documents shoved together, copies of emails, bank records, and a timeline chart connecting James's movements during deployment with an op my father oversaw. Sloppy. Desperate. They were trying to plant a narrative, create just enough smoke to make others wonder if there was fire, but it was too late for that. I sent the whole thing to Rachel, who just replied, "That's not a defense. That's a threat dressed as paperwork." The next morning, James installed new cameras on the property and added a second layer of passcode to our digital accounts. It wasn't paranoia. It was experience. When people like my parents feel the empire shaking, they don't step back. They double down. I didn't learn how to disarm bombs or break codes in the army. What I learned was simpler and more useful in real life: how to keep a straight face while reading a threat disguised as a policy, how to wait people out until they blink first, how to weaponize silence. And now I would use every ounce of that training not against enemy combatants, but against my own family. James and I spent the next 48 hours mapping out everything. We didn't just sit around reacting anymore. We went tactical. First step: control the message. We drafted a simple, calm, surgical public statement not about my parents, but about personal choice. We released it through a neutral party, not under our names. Just enough to clarify that we were moving forward with our wedding in Colorado by invitation only, with no family sponsors, press, or public endorsements. It was boring on purpose because people like my parents hate boring. You can't spin it. You can't hijack it. The second step was more strategic. We dug into everything they thought they'd buried. Using military contacts from my deployment days, I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to since Kuwait, a former Army analyst named Turner, who now ran data security for a veteran-owned firm out of Texas. I asked if he could trace any surveillance patterns tied to my name or James's digital footprints, metadata pings, anything linked to private intelligence firms. 3 hours later, he called back. "You've been monitored," he said. "Nothing overt, but someone's been querying your private travel logs and financial ties since February. Quietly, expensively." Name I asked. Paragon Consulting out of DC, Black Tier Consulting, mostly used by political campaigns. I didn't need to ask who hired them. I thanked him, wrote a thank you to his firm. Then I forwarded everything to Rachel with one note: time to build the wall. We locked down everything encrypted. Our cloud backups updated passwords to every financial and communication account, moved digital files into military-grade storage vaults, even had our wedding guest list scrubbed for possible plants. Because if someone's willing to hire private intel contractors to dig through your flight history, they're willing to send a +1 who's there to record your vows. While Rachel managed legal firewalls, I started working on something more analog. At the base of my closet, buried under old uniforms and deployment bags, was a small metal box marked red tape. Inside, notebooks, field briefings, copies of emails and orders from the Fallujah OP. Stuff I kept not because I needed it, but because I couldn't forget it. One page stood out now, a transfer form signed by Major Charles Bennett, my father. It had a routing code tied to an unauthorized vehicle reroute the day before James's unit got hit. It wasn't criminal, but it proved what I'd suspected for years: he rerouted backup resources without telling Central Ops, which meant James's team went in blind. The shit that followed wasn't just political, it was manufactured. I took that page, scanned it, and placed it in a lock drive under a private domain with a time-released access key. Then I wrote one line of code: if access.attempt, chocks, breach, release. To press. Not a threat, a safeguard. People like my parents only understand leverage when it's institutional. James walked into the room just as I finished. "You building a firewall or a warhead?" "Yes," I said. He dropped into the chair next to me, looking exhausted but steady. "You ever think about just walking away from all this every day?" And I like standing more. I wasn't fueled by revenge, not the Hollywood kind anyway. I didn't want to ruin them. I just wanted the freedom to get married without being puppeted by people who cared more about legacy than love. But freedom, I'd learned, isn't just walking away. Sometimes it's refusing to move when they expect you to fold. So we kept planning quietly, carefully. The venue in Colorado finalized catering. The dress was altered. The guest list shrank from 180 to 37, mostly people who'd shown up in my life during storms, not sunny speeches. Then the venue called. The manager's voice was nervous. Someone came by asking questions. Said they were freelance media? Did they say who hired them? No, but they kept bringing up your dad's name like it would open doors. I thanked her, asked for any security footage. She sent it. It wasn't media. It was a guy in a tailored suit who looked like he played golf on weekdays and investigated whistleblowers on weekends. I sent the image to Turner. 5 minutes later, he confirmed he works for Paragon. He's not freelance. He's campaign intelligence. They weren't just watching, they were probing. I called Rachel again. "Tell me we're still good." "We're more than good," she said. "We're protected. Define protected. Enough to survive their worst move. And that's what this had become. Not a wedding, not a family feud, not even a vendetta. It was about who would blink last, me or the institution that raised me, and I wasn't blinking. I woke up to the smell of burnt toast, And the kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful, it was tactical. James stood by the stove, half-dressed, flipping eggs like nothing had happened. But I knew something was off. He only cooked breakfast when he couldn't sleep. "What happened?" I asked. He didn't look at me right away, just set down the pan. "There's been a breach." I grabbed my phone, 2-factor login requests, 4 missed calls from Rachel, and a flagged attempt to access our wedding server from an IP pinged in Northern Virginia, Langley adjacent. We didn't need a map to guess who was behind it. Rachel called back on speaker. "They went for the kill shot," she said. "Somehow they got a partial draft of your statement and the declassified folder with the transfer orders." How, I asked. "I don't know yet, but they're spinning it, whispering to press that James falsified documentation to frame your father. Anonymous tips. Nothing on paper." "So they're trying to flip the story," James said calmly. "Exactly. If they can't shut you down legally, they'll discredit you in public. And fast." I hung up and threw on jeans and a sweatshirt. My military brain kicked in. 2 choices: play defense or hit back harder. We chose the second. I made one call to an old contact, Laura Hayes, now a reporter with embedded clearance and a reputation for going where others won't. We hadn't spoken since she covered a supply chain corruption case I helped expose back in Kandahar. "You got something?" she asked. "I've got everything." We met in a motel parking lot off I-70. I gave her copies of the field logs, the reprimand documents, the reroute orders, every receipt with my father's name, tied to a decision that led to lives endangered, and James's career tanked. She didn't blink. She just said, "I can't promise a headline." "I don't want a headline," I said. "I want a trail. Let people find it. Let them draw their own lines." Back at the house, James was already setting up digital redundancies. If they were coming through the web, we'd greet them with dead ends and firewalls strong enough to hold a tank. Then the power flickered twice. I looked at him. "That you?" "Nope." We checked the main breaker, nothing wrong. The cell signal dropped next, not a total blackout, just long enough to register. They were testing us. So we flipped it. We left the house, went completely dark. We packed one bag, locked everything down, and drove to a small cabin in the mountains James had once used during training. No internet, no cameras, just cold air, propane heat, and a place nobody knew existed except one guy who owed James a favor and he wasn't talking. We stayed there for 48 hours. New phones, new emails, just silence. At night, we played cards and drank from metal flasks that tasted like the army and poor choices. During the day, I reread the original reports, rewriting what I remembered, not just what was written, but what was missing. By the second night, something shifted. The fear wasn't gone, but the noise was. We were down to just ourselves. No noise, no surveillance. Just 2 people who'd had enough of being managed, edited, and contained. In that cabin, I stopped thinking about weddings and threats and legacy. I started thinking about who I was without the rank, the family name, or the pressure. I was just Sarah, and I was done playing by anyone's script. It was like crossing into a parallel universe when we finally came back into town. Rachel had left me 12 voicemails. Turner sent a message, "Check the blog." And there it was. Moral Ground had published a piece, not an exposé, a quiet post. Headline, "What if?" Loyalty was a trap inside, was just enough scanned excerpts of the command orders, a breakdown of how reprimand policy is manipulated, and a note from an unnamed source who accepted the consequences of silence to protect the chain of command and nearly lost everything. They never named James, never mentioned my dad, but people knew. The thread went viral within 12 hours, not trending but spreading like wildfire under the radar. Anonymous veteran accounts started chiming and heard stories like this. "This happens more than you think." "My CO did something similar in Mosul." Nobody talks. I didn't post a word, but I read every comment. So did James. He closed his laptop and looked at me. "You didn't destroy them," he said. "You just told the truth and gave it room to breathe. We didn't celebrate. We didn't need to because power doesn't always crack. Sometimes it loses control of the narrative. And once that's gone, it doesn't matter how loud they scream. The front gate was wide open the morning we returned from the cabin. We didn't leave it that way. James's hand went straight to his waistband instinct, not fear. He didn't draw, just kept it close as we stepped into the house. Nothing was broken, no signs of entry, but the couch cushion was moved, the back door was left unlatched, a lamp was unplugged. Subtle, deliberate, unmistakable. They'd been here not to steal, not to vandalize, to remind us they could. I walked to the kitchen, grabbed the drawer handle, and yanked hard just enough to feel the resistance. Still locked. Inside the backup drive was untouched. The decoy files were still intact. They were probing for weakness. They didn't find any. James swept the rest of the house, nothing missing. Nothing planted, just air that felt like someone else had been breathing in it. We changed all the locks that afternoon. Then Rachel called. "You might want to sit down," she said. I didn't. I just stared at the window. "Your father's campaign team filed a motion this morning to open an investigation into James's discharge. They're framing it as transparency for national security. He's not even running for anything federal." "Why would that be relevant?" I asked. "Because if they can spark doubt, they can label you as reckless, unfit to align with leadership. It's not about James, it's about you." They were aiming to stain my credibility, subtly, strategically. Rachel continued. "There's more. The campaign hired a retired general to offer commentary to media outlets. He's already made 2 appearances talking about a disturbing trend of insubordination among modern veterans. He never names James, but he's clearly referencing your file." I almost laughed. The playbook was so predictable it bordered on lazy. "Let them talk," I said. "We've got the truth. Truth doesn't win battles, Sarah. Leverage does." I hung up and turned to James. "They're making it about us. Then, let's remind them we're not the ones who blink." We called Turner, asked him to cross-check the campaign's newly hired media strategist. Within the hour, he sent back a name: Ethan Walsh, former defense consultant known for spinning uncomfortable military data into patriotic fluff, funded through shell donors tied to the Bennett PAC. I sent Ethan an email from a burner account with one line: "Spin this." Attached was the exact reprimand memo with my father's signature unredacted, along with a time-stamped log of every manipulation made to James's discharge paperwork pulled straight from the military system archive. Turner still had access. I didn't expect a reply, but within hours, the campaign's official site pulled down all language referencing James's history of instability. And 2 days later, Ethan resigned. That wasn't a victory, that was pressure working. Then came the real hit. My mother called me, not emailed, not texted, called. And I picked up. "This has gone far enough," she said. "Agreed. You're tearing apart your father's life. He built this on lies. I'm just refusing to live under them. You think the world cares about your little truth? People forget. People move on. You'll be left with nothing but bitterness." "No," I said. "I'll be left with a husband who didn't sell me for votes." She exhaled sharply. "You always were the ungrateful one. You were always better at pretending that wasn't true." I ended the call. No shouting, no tears, just clean disconnect. That night, James and I went over the final wedding plans. There wasn't much left to do. The dress had been delivered to a friend's studio for safekeeping. The license was filed. The officiant was briefed. We even had backup power at the venue if someone decided to get clever. I added 2 private security guards, not because I expected trouble, but because I didn't want to wonder if it was coming. And then I sent the final guest list: 32 people, no press, no PR, just humans. Each name was chosen not for blood but for loyalty, people who'd shown up for funerals, not fundraisers. People who didn't need a last name to know who I was. We stood in the kitchen with 2 mugs of lukewarm coffee staring at the list. "You sure?" James asked. "We've made it this far." He nodded. Then we walked through the fire together. That night, a letter slid under our front door, hand-delivered, no postage. Inside was a printed RSVP card, one of ours, the one we never mailed to my parents. On it, in my mother's handwriting, regretfully not attending. No signature, just that line. It didn't sting, it confirmed everything. I left the card on the fridge not as a keepsake, as evidence. Because even when they pretend to let go, people like that need you to know they're still watching. But the thing is, we weren't looking back. The RSVP card was still stuck to the fridge the next morning when Rachel called and said, "There's a leak." She wasn't panicking, which made it worse. "How bad?" "Contained for now. Someone inside your father's campaign office shared a document dump with a freelance investigator." Normally I'd say ignore it, but this isn't normal. I slid onto a stool, coffee still in hand. "Tell me." "It's a dump of internal memos, travel logs, encrypted messages, about a dozen files total. They're not published yet, but they're real. And your name is in 4 of them. James is in 5. I didn't speak. "The good news," she continued, "is that they came from inside, not hacked, not planted." Someone close flipped. That narrowed the field. Only 2 people had access to those files with direct knowledge of James's reprimand, and the memo I found in Margaret's envelope, one was my father. The other was his chief of staff, Michael Reed, the same guy who'd once offered to clean up a college prank of mine by making a phone call to the campus police chief. I told Rachel I needed to confirm it myself. "You're not breaking into anything," she said. "Of course not." I lied because I already knew I was going to DC, and I already knew I was going into my father's office, not like a burglar, not like a daughter, like someone who was done asking for access. I called Claire, told her to meet me behind the campaign HQ after 7 p.m., when most interns cleared out. She didn't ask questions, just said, "I'll bring coffee." At 7:23, she met me by the side door in a hoodie and jeans, like she was heading to a dive bar, not a federal office building. "You sure about this?" she asked. "Nope." "Cool. Let's go." She used her staff badge to swipe us into the elevator. No cameras on the second floor, something my dad insisted on for privacy. That worked in my favor. His office looked exactly as I remembered, 2 clean, cold, symmetrical, a shrine to control. The only thing out of place was a yellow notepad left face down on the desk. I didn't touch it. Instead, I opened the cabinet behind his desk. Locked, of course, but not with anything high-tech, just a 2-pin key lock and a bad assumption that no one would ever question him. Inside were 6 folders labeled with different cities: Denver, Houston, Richmond, Fayetteville, San Diego, Kabul. I pulled the one labeled Fayetteville. That's where James was stationed before his discharge. Inside, surveillance photos, personnel reviews, even printouts of social media messages between James and a former squad member, annotated, highlighted with passive-aggressive notes in the margins like potential leverage. "Jesus," Claire whispered. They were building a case. They were building a backup plan. I took pictures of every page, returned everything exactly as I found it. Then I grabbed the yellow notepad, flipped it. It wasn't a to-do list, it was a draft letter to the Department of the Army requesting a retroactive inquiry into James's security clearance. And it was already signed. "He was going to file this," I said after the wedding. Claire looked sick. "I used to think he was strict because he cared." "He cares," I said. "Just not about people. About legacy." We slipped out the same way we came in, no alarms, no shouting, just the echo of 1,000 career moves turning to dust. Back at the hotel, I sent everything to Rachel, labeled it Insurance Policy B. Then I called James. "You up? Just ran 4 miles because I couldn't sleep." "So yeah. Your instincts were right." "Which part?" "All of it." "You okay?" "I'm fine." But he's not. We didn't talk about the files. We didn't talk about the letter. We talked about the weather, the altitude, the angle of the sun on the trail behind our house. Because some days, victory doesn't feel like a parade. It feels like breathing without permission. The next morning, Rachel confirmed the leak originated from Michael Reed, not to protect us, but to protect himself. A preemptive leak meant he could claim whistleblower status if the story exploded. It was fine by me. I didn't care who played hero. I just needed their machine to rust. We spent the rest of the day securing the Colorado venue, hired 2 more plainclothes guards, swept the audio system, rechecked lighting, sound, and restroom locks. The florist asked if we wanted to add a white rose arch at the altar. I told her no. No frills, no illusions, just us. James had set out 2 old boots in the backyard when I got home. His and mine filled them with soil-planted sage and 1 rosemary in the other. They'll either thrive, he said, or burn. You really know how to set the mood. You're marrying a combat medic. Not yet. Soon then. And for once, that word didn't feel loaded. It felt like a landing. The night before the wedding, I shaved my legs with a combat knife. Not because it was symbolic, I just forgot to pack razors. James walked into the bathroom halfway through, did a double take, and said, "You know, we have actual grooming supplies, right? You're marrying a weapons specialist." I grinned. Not yet. We laughed. For once, it wasn't nervous or forced. It wasn't the kind of laugh you fake when trying not to cry. It was clean, real, almost domestic. But we both knew better than to relax. At 2 a.m., our off-site wedding server pinged a brute force login attempt from a proxy out of Florida, blocked instantly. Rachel flagged it and sent us the IP. It traced back to an IT contractor who'd done work for the Bennett campaign 6 months earlier. Another move. Another failed one. I turned off my phone, didn't even reply. By 6 a.m., I was awake barefoot in the kitchen, drinking hotel-grade coffee and eating protein bars from a tactical pouch like a field op. James was already dressed, black suit, no tie sleeves, slightly rolled. He looked less like a groom and more like a man walking into a Senate hearing. I loved it. We didn't speak much in the car, just held hands. His thumb tapped against my knuckle like it used to when we were deployed, pretending not to panic. The venue was perfect. Not grand, not dramatic. Just open air, good light, and the kind of silence you could lean into. 32 guests, every chair filled with someone who'd earned it. Rachel arrived first, black pantsuit, clipboard earpiece, and a folder labeled "just in case." Probably had affidavits, restraining orders, and a thermos of bourbon. She hugged me once, then went straight to scanning the perimeter. Claire showed up next, wearing a dress she'd borrowed, still beautiful, still zero nonsense. She handed me a tiny velvet pouch. "Don't open it now," she said. "But do open it." I slipped it into my jacket pocket. The officiant was a retired chaplain who'd once run marriage counseling on base and had officiated 3 dozen ceremonies, 2 of which stuck. She gave us both a look like, "Don't screw this up. I've seen worse." At 10:34 a.m., the ceremony began. No music, just a breeze through the trees and the crunch of gravel. As James and I walked in from opposite sides, we met in the middle. No one stood. No one clapped. This wasn't a theater, it was war and peace, both signing the same treaty. We didn't write long vows, just said the things that needed saying. I promised him I'd never treat silence as agreement. He promised he'd never mistake protection for control. The chaplain declared us married. Everyone exhaled. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't moved, but because I'd already grieved everything I needed to leave behind. The reception was small. No speeches, just food, drinks, and chairs that didn't match. Someone's kid spilled lemonade on James's pant leg and he laughed like it was a blessing. Around 2 p.m., Rachel tapped my shoulder. "You're not going to believe this. Is it a cease and desist shaped like a wedding gift close? Someone from your dad's donor network sent a floral arrangement. White lilies. No card. That's a message. Figured. That's why I torched it. Literally, you want pictures." We both laughed. Then I remembered the pouch Claire gave me. I stepped away, pulled it out, and opened it slowly. Inside, a keychain, military style, my initials on one side. On the other, etched in perfect block letters, "Not property of the Bennetts." I clipped it to my dress. No one noticed. Later that night, as we drove back to the rental house, James asked, Do you feel different? I feel done with needing them to feel anything. He reached for my hand again, same rhythm, same touch. Tomorrow, he said, we plant those boots. And after that, we burn the damn legacy. We pulled into the driveway. The porch light flickered once, then held. I looked up at it and said, "They thought this would be the war." It was, but not the way they planned. The first article dropped 3 days after the wedding. It wasn't from Moral Ground or any outlets we'd quietly fed evidence to. It came from a mid-tier independent journalist named C.J. Hadley, no affiliations, no filter, and a newsletter that reached half the DC donor list before lunch. The headline, "America's Most Decorated Military Family Has a Rotten Core." Subtle wasn't her brand. Inside were excerpts from the rerouted logistics files, notes from campaign memos, and interview quotes from 3 anonymous sources confirmed to have worked under Charles Bennett's command. One referenced patterns of tactical negligence buried beneath politics and privilege. Another described being told to rewrite event reports to fit a narrative more palatable for public donors. No one named names outright, they didn't have to. The timing did all the work. Within hours, 2 major fundraisers for my father's state campaign pulled out. A third issued a pause on contributions. A podcast host he used to love called The Piece an important reckoning for military families with unchecked influence. Then came the actual damage. A memo leaked, this time from inside the Committee for Defense Readiness, saying that Charles Bennett's name was being removed from consideration for a future defense advisory appointment, quietly, without a statement. That was the one he wanted the appointment more than any election, any fundraiser, any wedding parade. And it was gone. I didn't celebrate. I watched. Because what came next was worse. My mother's face appeared in a series of back-channel interviews, not public ones, just leaked audio from a closed meeting where she described the wedding as an embarrassment orchestrated by a daughter who never respected her family's values. She sounded exhausted, clipped, tired of pretending. People ate it up. A clip of her voice trended for 6 hours under a tag she would never acknowledge: fall of the Bennett lineage. James saw it on someone else's phone at a diner and sent me the link with a screenshot of the hash browns he didn't finish. I replied, "Told you legacy burns easy." The fallout wasn't fast, it was a slow drip of relevance disappearing. Campaign emails stopped hitting inboxes. Donor events got canceled. Even the family lawyer Bennett and Associates issued a statement distancing itself from active involvement in the family's internal matters, which in lawyer speak means, "Y'all are radioactive now." I never responded, never posted, never issued a statement. That was the strategy, let them choke on the silence they always thought they owned. But it wasn't all clean. A few die-hard supporters doubled down, claiming the story was manufactured by political enemies, that I was a bitter child capitalizing on her father's prominence. One radio show called me the military Meghan Markle, which honestly wasn't even original. Rachel forwarded the media tracking report with a note. "You want to hit back?" "No," I wrote. "I want them to run out of things to say, because eventually they would, and they did." My father gave a press conference a week later. His voice was thin, calculated. He looked like a man trying to shrink into his own tailored suit. He said the story was an unfortunate distraction, that our family has always served this country with pride, and that he would not be pursuing any further appointments at this time. Translation: retreat disguised as dignity. The empire hadn't exploded, it just crumbled in silence. At home, James built a raised garden bed in the backyard with the wood from the old shed. The boots we'd planted were thriving rosemary in one, sage in the other, tall and stubborn. "You think they'll come back?" he asked one night as we watered them. "The plants, or my parents, either." "Maybe," I said. "But not as themselves. Because some people don't return, they just send a new version, smaller, diluted, still clutching the same broken compass." That week, I got a letter, not a legal threat, a real letter typed, signed, from Michael Reed. He thanked me. He said he knew the empire was rotting years ago but didn't know how to leave without burning with it. Said the leak was his way of getting out. Said he hoped I found peace in the ruin. I didn't reply. I just tucked it into a folder labeled Done. The same day, a local reporter asked if James and I would sit for a profile on starting over after legacy betrayal. We passed not because we were hiding, but because we were living. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, it's surviving with your soul intact. It's marrying the person you trust, planting something that grows, and not answering the door when the past shows up with fake apologies. And more than anything, it's knowing that silence, once a weapon they used, now belongs to you. The rosemary bloomed first, not big or dramatic, just a single sprig that pushed through the soil like it had somewhere to be. I was drinking coffee in the backyard when I noticed it still in pajamas, still barefoot, and suddenly stupidly proud of a plant I'd have forgotten to water. I texted James a photo. He replied with a one-word message, resilient. That was the word now, not revenge, not victory. Resilient. We were still getting wedding cards from people who'd found the blog post or heard whispers from friends of friends. Most were kind, some veiled in concern the way people write when they're still trying to figure out if you were brave or just reckless. One even said, "You could have handled this more quietly." I didn't reply, because that's the point. Quiet was what almost destroyed us. I was raised in a house where silence was considered loyalty, and questions were considered betrayal. Where my father's approval was currency, and my mother's approval came only after I mirrored her exact version of womanhood. Where emotions were a liability and autonomy was a phase you were expected to grow out of. But I didn't grow out of it. I broke the pattern. I married someone who didn't want to shape me or polish me or turn me into an accessory for a photo op. I married someone who knew the difference between love and control, and how damn often those two get confused. I chose a life without handlers, without lawyers on retainer to manage fallout from basic honesty, without legacy as a leash. And for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't waiting for a phone call to ruin my week. I wasn't prepping talking points for a family dinner that was just a performance. I wasn't being rewritten in someone else's biography. I was just existing loudly, freely, and it was enough. James and I started talking about next steps, not 5-year plans, not ambitions, just steps. He applied for a position with a nonprofit that trains veterans for crisis response work. I bought a second-hand sewing machine and started repurposing my old uniforms into travel bags, not as art, not as therapy, just because I could. We didn't move, we didn't run. We stayed in the same town, same house, same creaky porch, with the light that flickers sometimes when it rains. People asked if we were scared. We weren't. We were awake. One afternoon, I got an email from a college student writing a thesis on family estrangement who wanted to interview someone who had chosen self over structure. That was her phrase, self over structure. I didn't respond, not because I didn't have something to say, but because I didn't owe the world a summary. Not anymore. Let the world do what it does. Let it twist, assume, and rotate the story until it fits their acceptable version. My truth doesn't need press. It just needs breath. Some days that meant replanting herbs. Other days it meant finally deleting voicemails from my mother without even listening. That's freedom too. A few months later, Claire visited. She'd left the campaign, moved to Oregon, and was teaching journalism at a community college. "I tell my students you can tell the truth without setting yourself on fire," she said. "You steal that from me." Obviously, she brought wine, bad takeout, and an envelope I wasn't expecting. Inside, a printout of a local news headline, "Decorated veteran couple launches, quiet initiative to mentor military families through legal abuse." There was no byline, no photos, just a small article in the corner of the page. "That's you, right?" she asked. I shrugged. "Does it matter?" "Not to you. But it will matter to someone." She was right. Someone somewhere would read that and know they weren't alone. And maybe that's the only reason you survive hard things out loud, not for applause or vindication, but so the next person doesn't feel insane for choosing peace over tradition. When she left, I sat outside and looked at the rosemary again, bigger now, stubborn as hell, just like me. James came out and sat beside me. We didn't talk. Didn't need to. I just watched the light shift like it does when evening doesn't ask permission. I took a long breath, the kind that expands your chest, not with drama, not with declaration, just with room. I didn't win anything. I didn't destroy anyone. I just got my life back. And this time, it's mine. Some people think family revenge stories are about chaos, courtroom showdowns, or burning bridges in public. But the truth is, sometimes the biggest revenge is just walking away with your dignity intact. No grand speech, no dramatic goodbye, just the quiet power of choosing peace over legacy, truth over tradition. If this kind of family drama and revenge story spoke to you, stories that feel real, raw, and maybe a little too close to home, hit that subscribe button. We've got more stories that don't just entertain, they make you think twice about who's pulling the strings. And leave a comment if you've ever had to rewrite your ending.